Welcome, Sandra, by the way.
Hey guys.
Here's Andrew.
Perfect. Should we do like a short introduction? I know Bax from before and his YouTube videos, which has been always a pleasure to watch. But since maybe Bram, you were, or Bax, of course, who maybe organized this, do you want to start and like just basically tell the people who we are?
Yeah, sure. And I'll give everybody a chance. Pretty much all four of us make YouTube videos, mostly about GPT-3 uh, or about AI in general. I would say all four of us are very high on the optimist and creativity spectrum, you know. And we have various things going on. Like I have a YouTube channel and a newsletter. I'll let Bram comment on podcasts he has going and sort of how he's exploring that medium. And so anyways, yeah, that's my intro. Make YouTube videos, have a newsletter, and I love talking about GPT-3. So thanks everybody for being here. Go ahead, Bram. You want to tell them about yourself?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, thank you for setting this up. This is really great. I really love the opportunity just to kind of chat about GPT-3 and chat especially with other creators in the community. So, yeah, I'm Bram. If it wasn't clear, I mean, it's obviously just the four of us on stage right now anyway. But basically, I'm an OpenAI community ambassador. So basically, I interface with OpenAI, but also kind of like interface with the community to kind of help set up events and stuff like that. In terms of GPT-3, I work at a company called Other Side AI. Shout out to Jason, who's in the audience down there. He's one of my coworkers, one of the founders of Other Side AI, where we are leveraging GPT-3 to build basically like an email generation system and kind of decrease the cognitive dissonance of email in general. Outside of that, I've built a ton of demos with GPT-3, specifically my favorite ones. I'll list the top three are one where I made visual poetry. So basically I used Runway ML to generate like drawings, and then I used GPT-3 to generate poems in the style of Rupi Kaur, and then I kind of just smashed them together with JavaScript. Another one was Lil DJ, where I basically used GPT-3 to type in a sentence, and it kind of set up a mood and then use that to call the Spotify API to seed a certain number of songs, and then it basically used those songs to seed a bigger playlist using the Spotify matching API. So that was a fun project as well. And then my last project that I'll talk about is I interviewed my augmented reality self. So that one was like kind of a meme that kind of blew up, which was really funny. But basically, I scanned myself with this app called N3D. I like rigged it in Blender, gave it a few animations, and then I used ARKit to load it into augmented reality space or 3D space, excuse me. And then I gave it a voice with GPT-3 and used SpeechKit to kind of turn the thing into text and then feed that back into audio and then have an interview, quote unquote, podcast interview with myself. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing. As Box mentioned, I also have a podcast where we interview creative technologists and stuff like that too, and that's kind of getting started. But that's pretty much where I'm at. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Sandra, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure, with pleasure. I also want to thank you, Bex, for setting it up. I think it's a super cool initiative, and I hope we will have more opportunities to talk about GPT-3. Hello, everybody. My name is Sandra. I'm actually coming from the startup angle. Startup world called NextGrid. And I set up a YouTube channel like a couple of months ago because I just saw so many super cool demos related to GPT-3, but also there's like more and more advancements in AI in this field, and I just had to find some channel to just think things through and also become a little bit creative myself with it. Actually, Bram, your demo with visual poetry is, I think, my favorite when it comes to GPT-3 demos. And Bax, I think your videos actually made me set up the channel in the first place because they showed me that people are interested in the subject. So yeah, that's kind of how it started, and now I focus on generally on AI trends and reviews of different AI-based products.
Awesome. And thank you for sharing that. so the topic is very broad, GPT-3 and content creation, and I'm happy to just talk about YouTube as well in relation to that. Like, it's awesome just knowing you can make videos and other people can see them and be impacted by them in some way or another, right? Like when Ollie, for example, made his GPT-3 AI book, which is a video he made, I
Would
was
it be
impacted by the.
would it be okay if I take 2 minutes to introduce myself as well, Bax?
I was just segueing into that, Ollie.
Oh,
So,
perfect. Sorry.
it's okay. Anyways, yeah, Ollie, why don't you tell them about the book that you wrote on your channel?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give some context of what I'm currently doing. Currently, I'm working as an analyst at Amazon London, helping Amazon Shipping basically optimize a few of their processes. Some other context is that I founded a company based in Sweden called DataAlliance.io, and connected to GPT-3. I used that algorithm basically to help pilots shorten the time spent on emailing instead be able to focus on basically flying planes. So yeah, kind of a fun project. Other than that, as Bax has mentioned, I wrote a book using GPT-3 and published it on Amazon Kindle. And I'm very intrigued about going more into literature. This is also something that's going to be a talk at Amazon in 2 months, where we're basically diving into how like machine learning and these kind of natural language processing algorithms are gonna probably change the way we're writing books or writing music, etc. Maybe the creative space in general. Other than that, at PyCon Sweden 2020, I was specifically talking about GPT-3 and its enterprise and commercial applications. So how that's actually working for larger institutions, etc. Same thing goes for Stockholm University. Had a guest lecture there and their operations management program, and talking about machine learning and data analytics, where of course I had to mention GPT-3 a couple of times there as well. And then also, in addition to the books, I've done a cover letter generator helping 2 PhD students landing jobs at Google and a nonprofit. And then also a Medium article generator, which basically produced an article about deep learning. And yeah, that's pretty much the TLDR of what I'm doing and why I'm here finding this discussion about GPT-3 very intriguing. Pretty much.
That's awesome. So, and by the way, I made everybody a moderator, so you guys can jump in and we'll see where the conversation goes. Just digging into the book, Ollie. Like, so you made a whole video. You shared how you did it. What was it like overall writing a whole book with GPT-3? What was the process like?
Definitely, I can go a little bit further into that. So first of all, some context of what kind of book this was. This isn't a literature masterpiece of 1,000 pages. This was a kid's book, basically about a robot named Bob that was going to different planets to find a little kid's father. The parts that are interesting in this is kind of how much it could be tested of the kind of brain power of GPT-3 to kind of see the patterns that I kind of try to navigate it towards. So it started off by basically just figuring out what I kind of wanted to talk about. So in this case, a robot named Bob. And then using GPT-3, I could show it that when I'm asking for generating a kid's book about, for example, a giraffe called Ginger, I could then give it the text from an actual kid's book about a giraffe called Ginger, so it could see basically what the output should look like. So that was basically just using one example. And for anyone who's used GPT-3 for any kind of projects, usually one could be enough depending on the complexity of the problem. In this case, it worked with just one example. It then could basically generate the introduction to the book, and then I could just basically ask the algorithm to just continue that after we have done the introduction, continue on and talk about how the book is going to proceed about maybe going to the next planet, etc. And the kind of key insight here, at least what made me super happy about using this algorithm, is that I try to use a little bit more of an historical reference to this. So anyone's interested in like Greek mythology, etc., is that we use the names of our planets, that Jupiter and Saturn are basically represented by Greek and Roman mythological gods. So you could basically pinpoint, like if you go into Mars, you go into a specific god. If you go into Jupiter, you are seeing another god. So what the kind of plan here was, so basically when I say that we're going to Mars and we're meeting the god for Mars, can't remember it on top of my head now, then when I'm asking the algorithm to now go to Jupiter, it actually recognized the significance of the specific god I referenced it to Mars and actually could fill that gap of the new god and gave it some special characteristics. And that kind of a point, I don't remember if I highlighted that in the video, but it was just an overall very interesting kind of point that made the algorithm very intriguing for me to use, at least. James, were you filling in here?
Hey folks, just was interested in this conversation just because I'm also developing a GPT-3 app for writers as well. Love to add to the conversation.
Cool. Feel free to join in. I'll just finish off basically here with the book talk here, and then Bax can basically go back to the moderation part. But yeah, so the book I think was like maybe 20, 30 pages, something like that. So a very short and concise book in that manner. And then basically published on Amazon Kindle because it's an easy and intuitive way. Of course, I'm biased since I'm working at Amazon. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah.
Well, so like for example, I had published a book just to get a children's book, especially to get my creative juices flowing way back in like 2016 or something. And I mean, the good part about Kindle is, it actually is fairly easy to put together a file, have it published and globally distributed. Anybody can buy the physical copy as well, right? So yeah, it's a little bit of a plug for Amazon, but it is powerful. And coming back to GPT-3, like there's a technical limitation and an interesting opportunity. So one of the most surprising things that I noticed OpenAI did was they had it set so that essentially you own the copyright to what GPT-3 generates, which I think is a very interesting, but also very generous policy, right? If it had been like a big conglomerate company, I don't think they would have let you retain the copyrights over it. So you wouldn't be able to distribute it and profit from it, right? But the other thing is, on one hand, the copyright is cool, but on the other hand, I've noticed GPT-3 is very limited in how many characters it can output. And so it's hard to come up with, like a 30 chapter book and make it all fit together. You have to do all these clever things with the API. Is that something you guys have noticed too?
Yeah, definitely. I think of it as sort of a centaur situation where writers have to work together with the machine. Like you need to still have skills in editing and writing, but as a tool to be able to give you inspiration. I think that's like a very unique intersection right now in tech and writing. But yeah, you still need to be able to have that cohesion, right? Because of that rolling window of about 2,000 characters or so. But that being said, I think that it still, 2,000, about 1,500 words or so, is still quite a bit of a chunk, right? So it can definitely help accelerate a lot of things.
Basically, the key thing is that it's helping us to eliminate writer's block. And I think that's kind of like the biggest hurdle for ambitious authors, like in the kind of more serious sense as, for example, me writing just a few kids' books. So it kind of just eliminates a lot of the getting it out there, and then you can fine tune it, which is just eliminating a lot of time spent on the first part.
I think I also want to highlight 2 points here in the idea of the foundational impact of what GPT is accomplishing, as well as the kind of stepwise kind of functionality of building big projects with GPT-3. So I think one of the things that, in terms of copyright by OpenAI and stuff like that, and kind of owning what people say when they use GPT-3, it's kind of tenuous because it's language itself, right? And language can be used in pretty much any vertical, right? You can use the same words to describe cars that you do to describe chemistry, that you speak at the doctor's office, that you speak to your partner. So just because of that, GPT is incredibly powerful and allows you to kind of think, like, only be limited by your imagination in terms of like what you can build with it. And in terms of like the kind of stepwise thing that James brought up, yeah, I agree totally. I think it's really important to be able to understand your problem space very deeply, as an author might, like you said, Ollie, and kind of split it into small chunks that GPT can be really good at fine-tuning solving those small parts, right? So when the beta first got started last July, I saw that a lot of people, myself included, immediately thought that a great use case would be like writing Instagram and market copy effectively, Instagram descriptions and tweets using GPT-3. And that is the case because it's something that is readily accessible through language and a very small space of correctness, right? So as the kind of problem space is expanded and people started thinking more deeper about bigger problems that they could solve with this technology, that's when people realized that the solution actually wasn't making a one big GPT-3 prompt. It was actually scaling down and doing the opposite and saying, what is our problem and how can we use GPT-3 to solve very small parts of the problem?
Yeah, well, we've been communicating to our users. We have about 100 fiction writers using my app right now. And it's mostly what we've been telling folks is like as if you found this piece of text on the internet. It's almost a little bit like research. And we highlight the words purple when you insert into your manuscript, just so that you should really integrate this organically into your work, right? And not just take wholesale 1,000 words that's coming out from the language model and just splicing it in.
So like I would the safety dimension is really important, right? So the 2,000 character limit is just so like a bunch of SEO people don't get together and destroy the internet and Google search as we know it, right? Just by generating these articles through GPT-3. But I would be interested, like if, for example, I want to publish a book, for example, on something like a topic like wealth creation, I wouldn't mind if GPT-3 could spin up multiple chapters, even if I don't end up using them and publishing them. And part of the reason I say that is just as a creative, I feel like the area we're all lacking is always in composition, right? And so composition is, it's a way of looking at like just the big picture of your piece. And yes, GPT-3, what I like about it is it can pull you out of these walls, like Ollie's describing. Yes, you can do this piecemeal, like one piece at a time approach to a piece. But I think earlier on, it'd be awesome if GPT-3 could generate an entire book and you can sort of see which vibe or which approach you like. And from that inspiration of the whole book and looking at it as a whole, then you could proceed with the smaller pieces. So I think there is some value in it.
Yeah, totally. And I think in terms of, the modern landscape of technology too, and the value of GPT-3, it can help accelerate or help you be that kind of catalyst as well, right? So it can either help you solve that writer's block, or it can just be the thing that kind of promotes that next level, which I think a lot of creators are interested in, right? They already kind of have a nascent idea of where they want to take their brand, or they have an idea of how they're trying to grow their presence on the internet, but they might not have a strategy. And GPT-3 can provide that strategy. And actually, I know that Sandra has had some videos on that too, in terms of like the different kind of demos that like help people kind of like see how to promote that next kind of level.
Yeah, Sandra, have you used GPT-3 to maybe help you with your YouTube scripts, for example, or like different pieces and stuff that you have going on?
Absolutely. So I was using both the GPT-3 OpenAI API to generate some, I think it was holiday episode when I was generating present ideas for my family. So that was like kind of part of the video script. But I was also using very interesting tool called Copy AI, which is generating social media content basically, and it's I think it's heavily based on GPT-3, and I was very impressed by the way it was able to fit into many different kind of social media narratives. I think it's once it gets fed with enough data, it's able to really smoothly kind of maneuver in both on the Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, taking into account all the limitations and kind of the different types of vibes of each of these platforms. So I was very impressed. When I was listening to Ollie, and also I was looking at your YouTube episode about the book, I wonder how coherent was the stuff that GPT-3 was generating for you, because you guys are talking about creating the whole book. Whenever I was trying to create like a longer text, I always had this I mean, it's not a problem, but it's definitely some sort of limitation or like a thing to address anyway when you're composing a book. That this like the way it generates ideas and kind of the randomness of this process makes it quite I mean, on the one hand, super versatile, but on the other, it's like kind of hard to piece it together. I mean, were you able to create a coherent character, Oli, with GPT-3 alongside GPT-3, or did you have to, you know, intervene a lot in the process?
Great question. I think this follows up a little bit on James's point previously. So what happened basically was that you generated like basically a kind of brainstorming format almost. So I think it maybe took on average maybe 3 to 4 kind of tries with the API to get the text that kind of fitted. And also, as Bax and the rest of you guys know, when you're playing around with the API and how creative you want it to be, it can turn out into something that is completely off topic. So I think I referenced this in the video, basically, that this being a kid's books story, having a algorithm generating basically on the level of Stephen King horror novels kind of next step in the story was maybe not the thing that we should just implement and accept. So it was definitely needed an eye of kind of like refinement and basically redo them a couple of times to check them out and make them kind of cohesive. So yeah, it's a bit less of a kind of complete generator for books and more of a just idea generator in essence. But then again, it's not only like a general idea generator, it's still taking considerations what you're putting into it. So it's a very kind of precise idea generator is maybe the most kind of, what do you say, sensible way of describing it. Do you have any comments on that, James, with doing a little bit more of a thorough project with the app that you talked about?
Yeah, I think generation is interesting, and it's sort of the first thing we all go to when using GPT-3. But I'm actually, there's a new use case that some of our writers have been using. GPT-3 is sort of a diagnostic tool. And I found this actually interesting as well. For example, when I'm writing a short story, I always reach a part where I don't quite understand the themes that I'm trying to get at. I need to like really hone it. And this is like, 3 or 4 drafts in. we have a series of features in our app that basically reflects on it, and summarizes the story, and also reflects on trying to figure out what themes that GPT-3 thinks is in that story. And so after using that, I've been able to actually break different story structures and different themes in my story, and actually have changed how I perceive a story and get me to that next draft to know what to hone. So I think that's an interesting thing, using sort of GPT-3's generation from your existing story to see, oh, it's going to go in this particular direction. I guess that's what the reader would think too, because that's sort of the understanding ability of GPT-3.
That's incredible. Like I know a lot of, for example, like concept artists, they will flip their canvas horizontally just to get their own painting from a different perspective, right? And like artists have all these tricks to sort of get out of their own heads. Like one of the things I like to do when I'm writing something, I'll put the text, take it outside of Google Docs or something, and put it in a weird format, like out of at least the positioning, so the text,
yes,
like it, and that helps me. It's sort of like a different feedback loop to get my own brain going. But what you're describing is an interesting phenomenon. So it's almost like you have GPT-3 in the loop of your writing process.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really like a self-reflection as well. Yeah, getting outside your head. If you can't go take a walk right now, maybe you should have GPT-3 tell you what it thinks the story is about. I think that's very valuable as sort of a rubber ducking, coming from the programming parlance.
Yeah. Well, so just, I am an idealist, future versions of GPT-3, like two things I'd be interested in. Like I mentioned, like writing the whole thing at once, just to even understand like your overall direction. And I sort of think about like for example, web design, we create design systems, right? I wish there was a way I could connect some kind of writing design system into longer pieces and have GPT-3 generate the entire book within that design system reality that I'm creating, right? Because one of the other maybe suggestions I have for the future versions of GPT-3, it's good they are doing human in the loop reinforcement for safety, but I would love human in the loop reinforcement just for creativity. And I think one of the reasons we are saying GPT-3 for generation or evaluation, I think GPT-3 could use help in getting closer to the essence of what we're trying to say. I think that's what writers are always struggling with, is how do I get closer to some essence of what I'm trying to say, right? And GPT-3 could help them get to that essence, I believe, with some kind of feedback loop or some kind of way in the future. And that would be a tremendous, tremendous aid to the writing process.
And it's funny that you bring that up because, these ideas that James and both of you have mentioned, Box, are the ideas of breaking your mind out of the space that it's currently in, but staying kind of relatively in the greater space, which is very kind of confusing, right? Like there's like two concentric circles where the inner one is no longer helpful and you need to get to a bigger one, but you can't get out too far or you just fall off the face of the planet and just go orbiting off into nowhere. So I think that it's kind of similar to back in the day. Like I used to write a lot of lyrics, and I would use like a thesaurus to basically reinvigorate my vocabulary part of my brain. And I don't know if you all are familiar with the babble versus prune hypothesis, but basically it's the function of your brain in the creative space where you're babbling and you kind of just like babble random stuff and then you prune out the good stuff from it, right? So one of the biggest things that GPT-3 has done to improve my own creativity has been being really, really good at babbling, but not necessarily being judgmental about the stuff that comes out. So sometimes when you're creating, you'll babble something that you think is stupid, then you'll think you're stupid, and then you'll give up on the project. But if GPT is babbling, there's no judgment. It's just a computer. It's just an algorithm. So it really kind of gives you the freedom to kind of turn off that part of your brain that gets really kind of frustrated as a creative and just babble away, and then use the more critical part of your brain, the pruning side, to find the good stuff within all of that new babble that psychobabble you've created with GPT-3, and really take out the gold.
Yeah, and another point that's probably going to make Milton Friedman roll over in his grave when I'm saying this. But I felt almost like a little bit unethically at ease when I actually published this book, because in essence, it's not completely just me writing this book. And of course, the capitalist should, of course, be a bit more intrigued about this, and that everyone has access to this and still use it for the markets kind of forces that it is. But I'd really love to hear about, for the rest of you guys here, everyone who's interested in speaking about this, because we're basically going to enter into an era where not only, of course, like books as this one is going to be affected by technology, but also like musical lyrics. So what we define as art and who's creating the art is going to be something that's going to be at least up for debate, if nothing else. Bex, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, Ollie, appreciate you bringing that up, because this is one of the first conversations Ollie and I had about GPT-3. And like, some ethics aside, I am getting into altruism, and I think there could be more altruism, or at least open dialogue about it in the GPT-3 community. That we can come back to that. But I do find GPT-3 interesting. The moment I started using it, I felt a lot richer. You know, like one of the more radical takes I have on it is I felt GPT-3 access does more for me to like my long-term career in life than my university degree did. And part of the reason is, in the past, if you were some, warlord or feudal lord or something like that, you could commission the common folk to go write a book about a certain topic for you, right? And you'd have to supervise them and give them money in order to write that book, right? But nowadays, it's not only not cruel, but you can just push a button and have GPT-3 write it for you, you know? And on top of that, GPT-3 demonstrates there is some evidence that it can speak multiple and communicate in different languages. So, one of the more radical takes, if we're combining altruism and content creation, I would love to see refugees have access to GPT-3. particularly if there's a language barrier, because I do think just the fact that they would be able to publish books and generate articles and communicate in their natural language might actually improve their economic outcomes.
That is such a good point. I think that a lot of creatives kind of enter the GPT-3 space and see linear kind of gains, making the good writers a little bit better. But the idea of kind of helping people tell their stories in a language that might not be their first is something that GPT-3 can really be greatly used as an altruistic tool. And I think that, James might have something to weigh in on this in terms of like helping authors write the kind of books that they want to write, but also helping them command the language with a level of efficiency that they might not have on their own without a lot of practice.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as almost like, we all, some of us remember pre-Google world and post-Google world, where you could have basically any kind of information at your fingertips. I sort of see myself as, when being introduced to GPT-3, before that, it was sort of just based on my critique partners and various other, I have writers list books and various other things like that. But I see that as like a supercharged version of that kind of research and kind of provocateur, of getting out of your head. Yeah, for our authors that are using us, they really are at the forefront right now. They're authors who aren't afraid to tinker with kind of new tools and try to get into their workflows. But I would say it's super early, right? I mean, I think a lot of the folks who are using it now are just we're all just discovering the sort of atomic units of how to use this kind of language model. I almost see it as, visual artists have had Photoshop and various other things that have been able to help the actual content of that kind of work. But as writers, we've previously only had tools to help you lay out your writing, to help you organize it, right, and not get to the actual heart of the content. So that's what really excites me about this kind of language model.
And so would you say, like, because so on one end, there's helping experts get even better at their craft, right? Sort of like how some of the best chess players now use AI models and train with them, right? And so you're already the best writer, and you can use GPT-3 as an aid or to provide perspective. But there's an incredible amount of opportunity for people who do not have the skills, right? Like, I look at, and I don't want to get on another topic, but I look at DALL-E and sort of the multimodal direction that OpenAI is probably heading, and same with the machine learning community. You might not need to know Photoshop or Illustrator anymore, right? And just the opportunity to liberate people who don't have the skills, or for example, who are just don't necessarily have the willpower or the patience to go through all the painful Photoshop tutorials, but they have creative ideas, right? That might actually change the world. There is tremendous potential.
Yeah, do we all become producers?
I mean, not necessarily. I think it depends. I think ultimately, I am Mr. Altruistic right now, just in terms of future videos I want to make, just on the topic. But I think everything is a question of identity. It's who do you want to be, right? If you want to be a writer, you pick up GPT-3. It might in the future be able to give you tutorials one-to-one on your writing, critique your work, write it for you. If you don't want to be a writer, you could use DALL-E and start making paintings, right? If you want to, I don't think everybody has to be something, but it is kind of a wealth creation on a huge scale that anyone can now contribute to some of the greatest works of humanity, right?
Sure, I totally agree. And on the end of basically creation, it's a little bit special because it becomes almost that we're not creating something completely new while we're still doing it. So for example, I have a friend that's working in the music industry and has been getting some consultancy work for me, where we basically look at him producing songs and me helping him generate lyrics through GPT-3. And the concept here is basically of putting in a special artist that you want the sound or the lyrics basically to be based off, but you're generating new kind of lyrics, but you still get the same kind of feeling as another artist. So in that case, you're basically not creating something new. My argument in previous videos, of course, is that we can create new stuff. So for example, my Bob the Robot kind of idea of the video, it was something that I could basically force them to create something new. But on a more kind of academic level or more like research level, we're not going to create like a Richard Feynman through GPT-3, is at least what I'm seeing here, because we're basing it, of course, on the current data that we already have out there. As a little bit of a like note to all of this discussion of creating new things with GPT-3 versus kind of what we're recreating with GPT-3, basically.
The newness idea is an interesting one, and I go back to wealth creation. I think creativity has always been about taste. I don't know how much skill matters anymore, especially if we're heading towards a multimodal future. And part of the reason I brought up composition in the beginning, I would love to give GPT-3 a mood board. So if you're familiar with maybe fashion design, fashion designers, their process begins with a mood board. So they'll have different textures and colors and fonts before they actually start drawing and designing the piece, right? And so I wish I could give GPT-3 a mood board and say, this is the basis, or Dolly, this is the basis for future kinds of creative works that I want. This is the vibe they should have. And I merely sit back, and the wealth creation happens in the way that I can critique whatever it produces to the highest level of taste that I believe is really valuable, right? And so that is the capitalist maybe opportunity, and the newness I think will come from your taste level, right? Like two producers can make the same beat, but there is something special about Kanye's beat or Kid Cudi's beat. I love his latest album. It's the taste level was so high, and the thought that went into the whole thing and the design decisions. I think that matters more so than the skills it took to load up Fruity Loops and choose the right tempo and those kinds of things.
And I think your point on remixing is really kind of prescient in terms of like who owns the tools enough to be able to say that they are the creative, right? Who like, is it the person who made FL Studio the reason that we can have so many beats, and are these beats really even worth anything without artists singing on top of them and supplying their own kind of vocal taste to the beat itself, or is it all kind of in the same kind of purpose of wealth generation? And I think that this is the kind of thing that GPT is good at. Ali's right, it's not necessarily going to create the next Richard Feynman or Albert Einstein, but it might shake people up enough to kind of look more at the tangential space available to them and kind of create something that wouldn't necessarily have been accessible to them prior. And that's the kind of, I think, power of these models, aside from the fact that this is the first kind of tool in history, not just GPT-3, but the recent rise of machine learning as a principle that have allowed people to automate mind work as opposed to just automating kind of like physical rote work. And I know to any other programmers up here, how it feels to kind of like have something do programming, quote unquote, for you as without writing code. Feels pretty good.
Do S want to chime in? I've seen you here for a little bit, and
my internet seems to not be doing very well, but I'm not sure if you guys heard my last. Hello?
hello.
Yep.
There we go. No, I was just saying, something I've been thinking about a lot is in the future where everybody has access to GPT-3, I wonder if there's going to be a cultural swing back to the artisan and maybe get to the point where we as a society value somebody who can prove that they did not use GPT-3 or any other machine learning assistant in their creation process. I'm really curious, especially when it comes to things like writing, music. There's something to be said to be able to, still develop a craft, right? The craft of writing or video editing or drawing or illustration that I'm wondering if you guys think will be preserved going forward.
Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about something similar for a while while listening to you guys. I'm thinking that it could be, that one does not exclude the other, and even nowadays we have like variety of artworks and ways of expression. We have artists that collab, so there's like a couple of egos around the table, and we have artists that are like these loners that have full control over their work and take satisfaction from that. And I think it will just continue to be like this. I mean, GPT-3 is amazing in a sense that it is a new tool that allows us to create things, but nonetheless, it is another tool. And I'm not sure that we can, at this point, call it like an independent creative agent, but I think we are also heading there, that there will be AIs that will definitely earn our respect to the degree that we will be willing to give them the contribution of the work. Although I guess maybe we could do that with GPT-3 already, but of course because the output is oftentimes quite random, it's still a little bit how to say it? It's still a little bit. Oh, never mind. So, what I'm trying to say is that I think we are getting there, but at the same time, that there are many ways of doing things, doing music or doing the visual arts, and I think it will continue to be like this.
Yeah, and Sandra, that's a great point. Like, you know, like my last video was about a Twitter account. You know, like it was almost like I mean, I kind of wrote the script as sort of a tech bros love letter to a Twitter account where all the tweets are generated by GPT-3, right? And in the script, I, you know, almost completely submit to it. I submit to an AI model, and there's all these weird, I made this like weird flow diagram just to show how weird it is for me as a person to admit that, you know, you know, the GPT-3 is already at that state where I feel it is pretty accurately replacing some of my heroes, right? And you could argue that that is a sort of a crazy artistic achievement, right? That GPT-3 is mimicking real people like Naval Ravikant. But as an aside, you know, I watched this documentary called Tim's Vermeer, and it's about this guy who works in Silicon Valley. You've seen it? Amazing.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, to be honest.
Yeah, and that guy was a software engineer, and he ended up producing entire replications of Vermeer's work, at least in my opinion, based on tools. He developed tools to basically, I think he reverse engineered Vermeer's tools that would create his works, right? And he ended up producing pretty good replicas of Vermeer style paintings. And so art and technology, if you go back to the Renaissance, it was the same thing, right? And I wouldn't say that in the future, people are going to take pride in the fact they did it themselves. I think in the future, we might be heading towards this interdisciplinary kind of world where art and science might actually be one of the same thing. And we might actually start blurring these lines, right? Between academia, artistry, creativity, and design. And to me, that's a really, really exciting possibility.
It's like, when does fan fiction just become fiction?
Yeah, there's actually a really interesting parallel in hip hop right now. Somebody mentioned Kid Cudi and Kanye earlier. So I don't know if anybody, you know, is like a hardcore fan, but there's actually like almost like two schools of thoughts that are emerging. One is the master craftsman, which is, you know, you got the Eminem at the top of the food chain, and then you have the collaborator rappers who embrace collaboration and bounce ideas off each other. Kanye is a notorious one. Drake is another one. Kid Cudi. So I see the exact same parallel happening already, which is we're sticking to our craft and we can prove that we wrote this entirely with no outside assistance, versus we really don't care about the craft as much as the final result, which is we want to create great music, and the means justify at the end.
Well, I think that the ends are to tell a story, right? So, for example, like I was just listening to like a Gorillaz album called Plastic Beach, like just earlier today, from like a few years ago. And they're trying to paint this dystopia through technology, right? So if you're painting a dystopian future and that's the main theme, for God's sakes, don't use GPT-3 and everything better be like an acoustic guitar, right? But whereas if you're Kanye and you're making an album like Stronger, which is all about futures and, a topic I really care about, by all means, use AI, right? Use GPT-3. So I think artists serve the message they're trying to tell, right? And if GPT-3, like Sandra mentioned, as a tool, if it can help you get there to whatever theme and story you're trying to tell, by all means, use it or don't use it, but it should add to the richness of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and I also
Right.
question the whole the outside assistance thing, because all artists, get feedback from somewhere. Maybe it's their close friends or it's a critique group. I sort of see GPT-3 as just like one of those tools that you use to get that sort of feedback.
But however, the kind of thing that's worth highlighting is that when these things get good enough, we're basically automating this completely. And then it becomes a capitalist game, basically, where the largest corporations such as Sony maybe are perhaps going to be basically auto-generating these things and reducing the kind of, what do you say, the way of younger or newer artists to kind of get into the space, because you have basically complete algorithms that know, based on incredible amounts of data, what exactly people want to hear. Because I completely, fully kind of understand and agree with you, James, in one sense, but at the same time, like, this is so new and it's gonna basically be adopted by like the really large corporations as well, and gonna make this like a huge challenge. And then of course this is spiraling into like other kind of like technologies such as NFTs, which is quite a recent technology. At least maybe it's just to me, but I think it's pretty recent, with non-fungible tokens, which is basically you can have a token that isn't interchangeable and basically represents something completely unique. And of course, this would be really good for younger artists to basically kind of almost patent their own song, or if it's going to be like a painting or whatever it could be, and then you can sell it in some NFT marketplace in the future. But yeah, Bax, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, like I definitely think that the crypto art is a tremendous potential. Imagine you could just pump out using GPT-3 and multimodal models in the future art and sell it and monetize it. And the crazy thing about crypto art is you can even get royalties, right? Like, so in some sense, this is an artist's dream. Like I just watched the masterclass where Timbaland was teaching how to make beats. He has two young guys work for him who produce beats. And I honestly feel like they're kind of playing the role of GPT-3 or AI. Like they're trying to just make some beat that enhances Timbaland's vision and he throws it into the mix. He either keeps it or rejects it, right? So like on one hand, I think it's a tremendous opportunity just to have a team through GPT-3. Like I don't even think it's an aid. I think it could be part of your crew as a producer, executive producer in the future, and everybody has access to it, right? Like I think of most startups, the reason they fail is they just don't have a good team, right? And so there's opportunity there. There is some notion about corporate. I think if, for example, Google released a mixtape generated through AI, they would get destroyed, right? Because I think like the coolness of using AI, I think will people from the perception of the masses, they will prefer just supporting the little guy as opposed to the corporate guy who could spin up infinite models and spend infinite amounts of money. But with that said, there's a tremendous amount of risk when it comes to corporate mind control, right? Like imagine Netflix, they have all your data and they use a multimodal model in the future to just generate the exact kind of content you want to watch. They already said their main enemy is sleep. Well, guess what? Probably their best friend will be AI. And then we'll all just be watching personalized auto-generated content, right? So I think this thing in the hands of the little guy, tremendously powerful. This thing in the hands of the big guy, like I don't know where it's gonna go. And that includes like.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Oh, yeah. Hi, this is such a great conversation, so thank you. And I wanted to jump in as a literature scholar. I've been thinking a lot about GPT-3 and poetry over the last year, and I was wondering about and have been wondering about the nature of, let me just put it like this: fury, anger, irritation, spite. Some of the, I guess, impetus for great art has been anger and emotion, and that this is, some of the GPT poetry I've seen, some of the content creation that I've seen has been largely, it's been fine, and it's been fine when no emotion is involved. Like I think GPT-3 probably writes better obituaries than anybody else with an absence of emotion, right? Who died, when, how, when's the funeral going to be, that kind of thing, right? So, but when we're talking about actual art, right? Unless GPT gets in a bar fight with somebody over a girl or a boy, I really don't see the nature of that fury or that spite. finding its way into the creation. And I'm seriously asking for your thoughts on this.
So yeah,
So
one thing our tool does is like a description tool. This is just one example. It can basically reflect on a paragraph and an object that you give it in that paragraph. Let's say that you're being like gagged or something, or like your hands are tied behind your back, and it will come back with sensory descriptions using GPT-3, and then a lot and metaphorical ones as well. And a lot of them that I've seen, and a lot of the writers that use it, it's phenomenal. It's full of turns of phrases that are highly emotional. Feels like it comes from a real place. Of course, not all of them will fit in necessarily inside your manuscript, but I would say that my experience with GPT-3 is actually the opposite. I've seen it reflect and show emotions to depths that and enhances the sort of the core emotions in my stories.
I'd love to hear this. Can you give me an example of is it a turn of phrase rather than the whole work? I'm really interested.
Sure. Why don't you give me like a phrase, and then I'll give you something back that might add.
I don't know. He walked in the room and saw a face he recognized.
While he's working on that, I'm going to chime in real quick because I think that was a really prescient point. The idea of both power and emotion, and how these two things are kind of linked, right? So like when we see an ad on the Super Bowl, a lot of us kind of tone out or phase out because we know that we're getting sold something and we don't feel emotionally connected, which is why these commercials really ramp up the kind of psychological connection that they're trying to form with their audience. So I think that GPT-3 is powerful, right? So it's powerful for the independent creator, which is going to have a more noticeable impact and splash on the type of creations that they can make. But it's also powerful for these mega corporations who have enough people and resources to be able to iterate through millions and millions of copy and say, yep, this is the commercial that made me cry the entire way through. This is the one that's going to win awards. This is the one that's going to close us deals. And I don't necessarily see that as a problem on its face, right? I think the idea of kind of patenting human ingenuity, especially with using language and kind of making beautiful poetry, is more of the idea of kind of like how an individual sees the creative space of using the same tools as language. Like GPT-3 didn't necessarily recreate language, it just gave us another way to look at it. Like language has been around for thousands of years. So I think that's the kind of thing I'll be on the lookout for artists to be doing over the next couple years and over the next couple decades, is kind of leveraging these tools to make themselves better at their host language, or a language that that they're maybe not mastering, but also being able to curate through their emotions. Hollis, kind of like the point, right? To find other words and synonyms and kind of turns of phrase, as James is hopefully soon going to put, to kind of have something more emotional and gripping.
I would also add, like, there's real science and research behind how GPT-3 gets better, right? And this is a serious exponential curve. Probably this spring, my suspicion is we will have GPT-4. And if it's at a trillion scale parameter model, it might be better than most writers ever, in my opinion. And
well, I don't doubt that.
like, this is scary stuff, right? Like, I encourage you to read the research papers. Like they just essentially, yeah. Like it's scary in the sense that they just need more parameters, and really it's a question of money. And turns out there's a lot of places you can get money, right?
Sure.
And so as they drive it up, and we could see GPT-3 can already do backflips, GPT-4 might, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, again, I've read some of the papers, and I've done some of the, here's a phrase. So I'm interested in what James is doing. I don't say I'm very good at it. But so far, I haven't really quite read any poetry that for its second rings true to me. But then again, I'm trusting you all on this.
Well, listen. So, can I chime in on that as well?
Go in on this.
Oh, so I was just going to say, Hollis, I think I, in a way, almost disagree fundamentally when it comes to poetry. And I think a lot of the meaning that we extract as readers comes from the context of who the author is. I think partially the reason you're not getting that emotional connection is because you already know that GPT-3 wrote it. Just a few months back, there was, I think, a college kid who wrote an article using GPT-3, and it made its way to the top of Reddit or Hacker News a bunch of people have already been fooled. I personally created a Twitter account that tweets philosophy that's been generated by entirely by GPT-3. It's in my bio, you can check it out. But I ran a little experiment where I was posting those quotes on my Instagram for a good week or two, and I was receiving messages that, you know, I'm pretty brilliant for coming up with these phrases, and it wasn't until recently that I disclosed that they're completely AI generated. So I think that the context of you knowing that GPT-3 created it kind of detracts away from that meaning that you're searching for.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your point about the Twitter. And I saw the journal article. I'll just step in and correct a couple of things. Most of the poetry I do, I have no idea who wrote. Most of the poetry I read, the author is irrelevant to me, and my work is fairly deeply having to do with excavating unknown works by unknown people. So I'm fairly proficient in trying to extract meaning from the words themselves, having absolutely no idea who the author is. So it's not exactly that, and it's the idea of what one sees from the words themselves and how they resonate with each other. That's so. Anyway, thank you.
Quick question.
That's a great point, and thank you for sharing that. Like, so you get like tons of emails a day with poetry, basically?
It's my
Like
scholarship. No, it's my scholarship. I mean, I'm a historian of poetry that appeared in newspapers hundreds of years ago, that you know, is often without authors. So what I do, my latest book is 19th century African American sonnets written by unknown poets, black poets in black newspapers. So I read the poems themselves and have to figure out in other ways who wrote them, when they were written, and what their echoes are with what the person was reading at the time. So that is my scholarship. So I bring a certain amount of expertise to this question.
Well,
would you be willing to? Oh, go ahead.
Just the beauty of you sharing, though, that these are people you've never met, that are from a completely different life. They might as well be AI to you.
Well,
you know, I appreciate you sharing that, right? Because it gives us some context, right? Like, you know, we're not in the expert position to judge GPT-3 on poetry. Certainly I'm not, right? But
right.
You know, I do appreciate your day-to-day life. That's something important to keep in mind.
Thank you. Yeah, and what I was going to say about that is that, again, how one can tell who wrote something or when or why is through echoes of what else was being read at the time. So when you read something and you see, you know, some reference to something that perhaps a popular Tennyson poem was doing, or a meter that sort of, again, might be taken after Hiawatha Longfellow, for example, then you can sort of date a poem having to do with its context. That is what I do. That is what scholars do. So again, when I've read AI poetry, I can tell immediately.
Would you be willing to bet on that?
Absolutely. And I mean that, I don't mean this in any sort of negative way. I would be so happy. I would be really happy to read poetry and to have GPT-4 or 5, again, echo that engagement.
Would it be possible to chime in real quick?
Oh, go ahead, James. I'm interested in what you.
Yeah. So just here's a turn of phrase that my app came back with. So you said he walked into the room and saw a face he recognized, which was kind of an abstract kind of thing, right? So here's a selection, one selection I liked. It was his father, late 60s, adorned in expensive clothes of dark leather and fine silk, who sat at the desk in a large room. His face was gaunt, with a nimbus of silver hair around his head. He wears a fine, high-quality suit, the kind that shows a thin line of his lean body underneath. His father's voice was a whisper, as if the words he spoke were meant for his ears alone.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hollis, would you be open, and just out of curiosity, to maybe set up an experiment where James maybe generates 10 poems and we intermix them with human creations? Would you be confident that you can distinguish between the two?
I would love to do that, and I'd love to be wrong, which is the thing. Is you all have seen in this room much more than I've seen, and I've only seen what I've seen come across in various articles. Gwern had done some stuff over the summer that I looked at, and I had asked Sam Altman for access to the OpenAI, the GPT-3, but you are the experts in what they can do. I'm an expert in something else.
Well, what we're saying is, everybody in this room is not the expert that you are on the other side of the coin, right? Other than
Right.
AI. So we could use an expert to actually tell us. And, you know, futuristic
Okay,
models,
done.
like there's nothing stopping OpenAI from launching GPT-poetry, right? And trained with you in the loop. So you would be dictating with the AI, this is a great poem, this is not, right? And effectively in the future, the futuristic opportunity is, you know, we can create a super intelligence just for poetry, right? Like that's the vector where things eventually go. But the important part is you, actually. It's less of us. Like there's tons of people who can train models.
Well, thank you. All right, so you can
Agreed.
find my you can DM me and we can set up a time to do that. I'd appreciate that, because I'll comment right now on what James's GPT-3 did. It's interesting. The words, you've got nimbus there, which is a funny word that doesn't usually show up in a description of a person. Gaunt line, and sort of the leather and silk. There's a lot of words that sort of stick out in me that, again, for me, this is just me talking and having heard it once, my antenna would have gone up, because that cluster of words is not always used together in a description, given the etymology of the words and how they're generally used. I would have sort of placed it in a kind of weird, I don't know, late 19th century context. And I would have sort of wondered, you know, what kind of dime store novel sold at British train stations that came from. That's my response.
So how much of
Yeah.
poetry, and I'm curious about this, how much of it is about context, right? Because like I certainly, like, I believe beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Like so when I made a video on GPT-3 Naval Ravikant, that was beautiful to me. And I don't have the context of previous poems and those kinds of things, right? But is that just a function of poetry? Like, is poetry always about context? Like what proportion would you say? Like 50% is context and 50% is the actual artist and the message they're saying?
First of all, boy, would I love to have you in my graduate seminars on poetry, because that's a great question, right? The question is that all poetry knows, well, I would say most poetry knows that it's poetry and knows that it exists in a long line of poetry, of which poems are situating themselves, right? So beauty is part of it. Beauty, genius, originality is certainly a lot of it, but almost all poets are writing in the tradition of, this is how the line lengths work. This is the kind of rhymes, if there's going to be rhymes. These are the cliches. These are the gestures toward the Shakespearean. This is the gestures toward some other tradition. These are the poems that I admire. This is the history of poems about fathers, about mothers, about roads diverging in the woods. So I would say the very best poets and poems know exactly where they are in that tradition.
And this is true for traditional and contemporary works. Like it does fall within this context.
Absolutely. So if you even look
Okay.
at Amanda Gorman's poem at the inauguration, for example, had two very distinct gestures to two previous inauguration poems, one by Frost and one by Maya Angelou, showing that she herself was putting her own inaugural poem in that tradition.
Awesome. And so the piece that you just heard James generate, could you give us a rating on how you would rate it from 1 to 10 with context and without?
Well, let me see. Now so rating is a hard thing to do. I would rate it as interesting. I would rate it as, I want to read more. I would rate it as, why did you use the particular words that you use? Because if you think about the metaphor I like is like iron filings with a magnet, right? You know, if you've got iron filings on a table and you hold a magnet close to them, they all sort of line up in the same direction. And what a very good work of literature does is all those iron filings, which is the constellation of associations of every single word, you want to point in a general direction. And a bad work of art, the constellation of associations of every single word points in sort of different and haphazard directions. So I heard a little bit of haphazardness in what James had written.
Yeah, and
That
a
is
part of that
awesome.
is because there's not much context, right? It's just going from that one line. So a lot of the suggestions that comes back to me are quite haphazard. But if you were to actually have, a few paragraphs of the story prior to this, GPT-3 is really good at picking up those constellations and continuing them in novel ways.
That's what I'm interested in right there. And if GPT-3 or 4 or 5, again, can understand that, right? So if they use a phrase like Nimbus and knows like other places that it's been used and that you would, those would, those echo, that would echo here, like that is better than most writers, right? That would be better than most writers. I'd be really excited about that.
That's I find your analysis fascinating, and I think it will be. I can't speak on everybody in the room, but I think it will be extremely educational and fascinating for us to watch that experiment unfold. If anybody's down to set it up, I'll gladly observe.
Even just hearing how you describe things. I mean, obviously this is your world, right? But I mean, there's a certain beauty just creatively, like when you're talking about constellations and stuff, right? Like I write YouTube scripts. I don't describe my scripts in that way, right? And just one of my small criticisms, I wish OpenAI would open up more to people like you, to be honest, right? Like we just do not have enough creatives in the GPT-3 community. We don't have pure artists. We don't have people who are passionate about the environment, for example, or at least I haven't seen disclosures as to what percentage of people, like what do they do for a living and what are the ideological breakdowns. But like, anyways, I do appreciate you really chiming in because this has been beneficial to us. I certainly don't look at a poem the same way that you do.
Yeah, I'm also happy to set up a test sometime, because I'm currently improving our system is to actually run blind tests with myself and our users with various seeds and snippets, and do subjective ratings of the passages that come out. My background is actually in psychoacoustics before, so I see it as very similar to audio quality, because a lot of that is subjective as well. So doing listening tests is, I'm basically reading AI slush a lot.
And I think one of the interesting things about art in general and how it's like moved through cultures, or at least the way that I've always seen it, is that tastemakers have like a trained ear for what they're looking for, right? So it's like there's certain kind of cues that an expert sees, or certain kind of small hints that something is an expert work or something is off, and just kind of has that off smell to it if it's created by something that's kind of like false. So one thing that I might be interested as well in terms of how this test grows is kind of like how future artists and future experts will be able to leverage this kind of artificial intelligence to increase their own level of expertise, but also not get stuck by their expertise, right? So they won't necessarily need to feel like they're getting outdated as time passes them by, and they are only in tune with maybe a certain type of writing. And Hollis, have you seen that in terms of like kind of like as poetry has even evolved in your own career, that like things that were kind of taste making, quote unquote, before aren't the same as later in your career?
Yes, no, absolutely. And again, this is such a much better conversation than I've had in many of my poetry seminars, because you're asking different and really important questions about what the ingredients are. So I'm really, really happy about this conversation. And I just followed several of you so that we could stay in touch. Absolutely. I mean, the book that I just published this past summer on the African American sonnet tradition is about, the ways that sonnets and certain trends and emotions and turns of phrase were variously popular at different points of time and then are not anymore. For example, I would say my academic claim to fame was when Henry Louis Gates in 2002 found a manuscript that he had hoped was going to have found out to have been written by an escaped enslaved woman in the 1850s. And all we had is the written manuscript. He published some excerpts of it in the New Yorker magazine, and I took one read, one glance, and I was like, oh, she's copying and rewriting Charles Dickens, which nobody had noticed because they weren't looking for echoes and and ways that she would have been writing. They were looking for examples that she may have been enslaved, which is different than looking at what the ingredients were that went into her writing. And Gates and I have written several books together on this question of, what it is that enslaved writers in America were reading and how the things that they were reading found themselves into that text. So yes, I'm going to need to go in a minute and go back to my day job, but I'm so excited to have this conversation. And I've been knocking on the door of people like you, not you all, saying, how can I help? Because I do think I bring something, and I want to learn from you. So I would very much appreciate continuing the conversation.
Yeah, so kind of as like a final point here maybe would be that currently in GPT-3's current state is that maybe to see it more as a creative toolbox rather than the substitute or the kind of replacement of creative writing, for example. So this goes for, of course, writers for fiction and nonfiction, musicians, and you name it. So once again, as a reference to the beginning of the talk, when I wrote the book, the kids' book, and published it on Amazon, it's going to be more of like getting assistance in the beginning currently. But also back to Back's point is that using this algorithm and actually playing around with it, and I'm really hoping that you can get an access to this, Hollis, because it's a really fun tool to be playing around with. It is really kind of over the expectation I had, and I had pretty high expectation in the beginning of at least how it can connect the dots to things that might be not as obvious as mentioned before, of planets and the names of it in reference to Greek mythology, and GPT-3 picking up on it and continuing the storyline, not perfectly, but still to maybe a 90% accuracy rate, where you have to finalize the 10% to make a really pleasant and just really intriguing story.
Fantastic. Yes, I think actually I am absolutely convinced that AI and whether GPT-3 or somebody else can do a much better job finding echoes than I could, because I only know what I know. If a good AI system has read everything to be able to say, to even, like, I don't mean to say just plagiarism detection, but echo detection, I think is really open and would be extraordinary. I mean, I think actually more the analysis of than the creation of excites me about GPT-3.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, Hollis, thank you so much for being here. And like I mentioned, like your skill is actually the more rare skill on out of everybody here, right? And one of the things I am critical about the tech industry is we do not branch out of our own disciplines, and so it's just the beauty of this moment is to hear from you. And certainly the way you look at the world is just so different. And I think these kinds of feedback that you can give OpenAI can actually improve the model and create these really powerful interdisciplinary kinds of outcomes.
Fantastic. Okay, stay in touch. See you later. See you, James. Bye.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, great talking.
Thank you. And
yeah,
so,
Bax, one of the it's interesting because one of the criteria that we use for selecting people into the app is if they actually mention GPT-3 in the application process, we say, rather not have you. We want people who are not even aware that this exists, or understand the story under the hood, because we feel like if we create the tools to democratize the people who don't have that inside baseball knowledge, it's actually better.
You need to really enforce I believe diversity, right? Now I believe OpenAI does a great job, but how many poets do they have on staff with her degree? Let's be honest here.
Exactly.
Right? And if it was true that there was at least even one person, we might have a better version of GPT-3 when it comes to poetry, or in her case, African American poetry, right? These influences will show up in the outcome of the model, in the output of the model, if you simply strive and create that right DNA and plant the right seeds to get it, But GPT-3, I think was phenomenal release. I think in the future versions they'll be far more intentional about what they do and what they think is important, and all the different design criteria they'll put into it. So, anyways, folks, so we're at 5:13 for me. I'm happy to keep going, maybe until 5:30. I don't know how long everybody wants to keep going. I think it's a tremendous conversation.
I'm currently in a time zone where it's time for me to drop off at least. I'd like to do just a quick shout out to thank you to you, Bax, for arranging this, of course, and Bram and Sandra for just joining in as this conversation as well. James, as you guys too. A shameless plug. I have a YouTube channel. Ollie Green GPT-3 is basically what you can search for. And yeah, really enjoy this conversation and hope to do it some other time. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And make sure you check out his video about making that book. I think if you want to learn more about the topic or what's possible with GPT-3, in fact, I encourage you to buy the book. Right, Ollie?
Thanks, Max. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, I should also get headed out, but this has been a really great conversation. Really excited to see other GPT-3 creators in the space, but also just creators in the space, right? I think that's the thing, that's the underlying kind of thing, is that sometimes we get so caught up by particular technologies and what they can and can't do that we forget that the real kind of victory is for the people who leverage it to make really cool stuff.
Something in common. We all started.
Awesome. Okay, so do we just want to call it here then, or like I'm happy to stick around 5:30, take any just open floor kind of questions.
$5:30 sounds about right.
Maybe some questions from the audience.
Yeah,
I'm
maybe we
listening
can bring
passively
people from the audience. Actually, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe. Let's see.
Okay, I've granted access. So is it Jan? Is it Jan?
It's Jan. Hello.
Yeah. I apologize for that, Jan. Please proceed with your question.
Thank you for the conversation. Really interesting. Love to hear other people experimenting with GPT-3. I would like to hear your opinion about the fact that I think Kasparov said that chess computer enabled new generation of chess players because they didn't need another player to actually grow with them, and they were provided immediately with the feedback. So I'm wondering, like, what kind of sectors, a creative sector, will be tremendously impacted by that, and also how do you actually see? That's the first question, and the second question is more about the ecosystem of GPT-3. You mentioned the copy AI. I see that copy AI is the tool for the end consumers. They're actually not directly experiment with the prompts. So there will be probably a prompt writers as a job, or at least as a expertise. But also, since the language model is like kind of the black box, there will be also higher level of like people who will actually try to even discover how it all works. So that's the second question is, how do you see this unbundle? What kind of jobs will GPT-3 enable? Thank you.
I think I could probably chime in on the first question. So I actually put together, I scraped Twitter for all the exciting demos I was seeing where GPT-3 was being applied across various industries, and compiled like a 20-minute clip on my YouTube that you can check out. But it's interesting because I see GPT as obviously, as we discussed, a creative tool when it comes to semantics, but I also see it as, in a way, as a translator where it could translate intention. So one of the demos, I'm a product and UX designer. So one of the things that excites me is you could actually describe an app that you'd like, and it could almost translate it to the actual design. So there's videos of this and things like that, the translational function where it could almost read intentions and spit out a coded app, right, in JavaScript, or create a Figma file that's already connected and prototyped out, or work with Excel, for example. So I think it's the translational part of GPT-3 is what excites me, I think, more than the creative side when it comes to just text. And I think that's going to enable a lot of different industries to like API almost into GPT-3 and maximize their output.
I would speak to, so Jan, in regards to your second question about jobs, I think more like roles, you know, certainly maybe beyond GPT-3 when we get to multimodal. So multimodal is basically combining text and images, text and video, text and audio, or like text, audio, and video, right? I think the opportunity with multimodal is, you know, you could hear an album, like, so we're talking about Kid Cudi's album. You could hear that album and then tell Dolly, which is a multimodal model OpenAI is working on, to generate a pair of shoes based on that album, right? And so I think the opportunity creatively is to just combine these different mediums and get the same texture or soul that they bring to the table and apply it to different mediums as a whole and even parts of your work. You know, say you're writing one verse and you want that verse to sound like Big Sean, right? So now it sounds like suddenly you have a Big Sean sounding kind of verse, and that creates more diversity in your creative outcomes, right? As for role, I think surprisingly, there might be people who just specialize in helping you find the right mediums and pieces of art that apply to your piece, right? So in the same way, 3D teams have somebody called a texture artist. They just specialize in texture, depending upon what kind of object. I suspect in the future there will be, you know, multimodal texture artists who can just look at what you're trying to do and reference this whole body of work, whether it's music or video or an advertisement that could be added to your piece to make it better. But I think everybody's role, if they want it to be in the future, will be a tastemaker. That's what I would put my money on.
Thank you. That's now I get better what you mean by multimodal. So basically, you can actually with DALL-E, you can input kind of a mood board and get the text, but also vice versa, input the text and get a mood board. Because actually there is some kind of, I mean, people were trying to really visualize the outputs from the GPT-3.
Yeah, like the cool thing about the Dolly paper, Dolly paper and website release, they you know, the groundbreaking moment for me was when they made a chair shaped like an avocado. And to me, when I saw that chair shaped like an avocado, it was like they made history. You know, I felt history was made. I honestly felt like we're looking at, you know, like sort of like you know how Disney had that, I believe like it's an animation of Mickey. I think we just had our Mickey Mouse moment when it comes to multimodal creativity. And it's a tremendous opportunity. I think creatives do synthesize a lot of different mediums and ideas and put them into their work, right? And a lot of them like openly say they have synesthesia, right? Like Kanye says he has synesthesia. Like when he hears Pharrell too, when Pharrell hears music, he sees colors. And so I suspect there is a multimodal relationship anyways with creativity. I think our algorithms will just start reflecting that. And that's the real opportunity with content creation.
Stepping in there while I'm hanging up my laundry. How about we move on to maybe, for example, Elle, and see what the next question is before we have to go.
Hi, this conversation is fascinating to me. Just earlier today, I was having a conversation with Lupe Fiasco talking about rap and just like putting it into a prism and what could be created and what couldn't be created. So I was really excited when I saw this GPT and content creation room and just fascinated because I follow Hollis as well. Just fascinated by how so many people kind of have the same kind of ideas at the same time. And now is definitely the time to make it happen. So I had a couple of basic questions, a couple of silly questions as well, but I'm brave enough to ask them. One, how do you even get access to GPT-3 in the first place? Like if I have a loose grasp on technology and I'm kind of generally a smart self-taught person, how do I even get access to play with GPT in the first place?
So I can answer that. I made a whole video on it. And part of the reason I made the video is simply because I felt bad that there's just so many people out there who want access but can't seem to get it. Because to be honest, OpenAI, which is the company that made the GPT-3 model and is providing it, they haven't talked about it either. Like, how do people get access? When do some people get access? When do they not? What criteria are you looking for? So anyways, I encourage you to watch my video, not as a plug, but because it's actually helped a lot of people from what I've heard. Like I get emails and Slack messages all the time people are saying that it helped them get access. I wouldn't be surprised if a few people perhaps in the room also got access through my original video. So I recommend you do whatever is in there, because that's like my whole full understanding of the topic. The only exception is, since I made the video, you might be an academic, so I wouldn't mention that I'm an academic specifically, which is advice I gave in the video, which I think is now bad advice. But anyways, and to give context, so the reason the model is limited access only is because of safety. So this model in the hands of the wrong people can do really, honestly, potentially very evil things at a huge scale. So that's the reason, you need to apply for access. And I encourage you to watch my video to get access.
Awesome. And then my second question was more about the tastemakers side of things, because I've been kind of intuitively feeling the same way as well. Like the people who are able to identify what is good and what is bad are actually going to be the most valuable in the future, because everything is going to be so, highly generated. So what do you think about people who are tastemakers for things that are less okay, I'm gonna say it this way. I think that there are some skill sets that some people have that aren't necessarily studied yet. They don't really have a area of study like in a college or in an academic setting. So what do you think about new skill sets that will come to be because of AI, and what do you think some of them are? For instance, when Clubhouse came out, there's all these new influencers who you'll go to their Instagram and they really don't even have any followers on Instagram or on Facebook or anything like that, because their value didn't really translate through those mediums. But then when you come to Clubhouse, the person they are, the skill set they have, all of a sudden it's almost like a new currency. So what new currencies do you think will be created through implementing AI technology in the future? Or what skill sets do you think will become the new currency?
I'll chime in on that. I think that curation, as you mentioned, is going to be a huge factor of it. It's kind of like having a deeper kind of understanding of the thing that you're trying to create as opposed to emulate. So I think, if you follow the YouTube space, there's a lot of people who will recommend that your videos have to be a certain length and you have to upload consistently and have thumbnails that look like this or titles that look like this to attract clicks. And to a point, that's true. But then what basically happens is you get a bunch of really kind of diluted content on the platform because people aren't really kind of doing things that seem more unique to them as a selling point, right? So the nice thing about GPT-3 is that it makes it easier to produce content that is true to you, hopefully, as time goes forward and these tools get better. So we'll be able to have more people produce the things that are unique to themselves, and the true skill will be understanding who you are and the type of thing that you're trying to create. So instead of trying to compete directly with everybody else on the platform, like a Clubhouse or an Instagram or a Twitter, it's going to be more about like, what do I particularly offer in terms of this is just video content, or this is just written content, or this is audio content, and the platform doesn't necessarily matter. So that's at least my take on it.
Okay, thanks. So unique perspectives based in some sort of authenticity.
Yeah, that you'll be able to parse down by your so GPT will help you create a bunch of different types of ideas and content and small executable pieces that you'll be able to narrow in on and say like, nope, this one is closest to me.
And GPT-3 can do a ton of things, right? Like we actually don't even know all the things it's capable of because it is so powerful, right? And so, one of the causes I'm promoting recently has just been altruistic use cases, right? So, can we solve cancer? Can we do something about equality? Can we fix the environment? Or can we at least start thinking about it? And so, honestly, the world is your oyster, and I think that's the real power of GPT-3. Whatever you want to do, regardless of your ability, you might actually be able to do it now. And so, the question to you that I propose, Al, is what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? And perhaps start leveraging GPT-3 to start being and doing that.
I will. Thanks so much.
Can we move down the question line? Willonius, do you have a question?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just real quick, man. I appreciate you guys doing this talk, man, because I definitely followed you guys on YouTube. But I'm kind of new to GP3. I mean, I've heard about it in some previous rooms, but I'm a stand-up comedian and comedy writer, so I just wanted to know, like, how should I think about GP3, like in that space. Like what exactly that? In your opinion, like what could I do with comedy using this technology?
I'm actually gonna also chime in here because I've done a lot of improv in the past, and I love improv comedy. So I tried really hard when I first got into the beta to make funny stuff with GPT-3, and I actually struggled, right? Because GPT-3 is really good at writing what's next. So mathematically, what it's doing is basically a big probability calculation, and that turns out to be really bad for comedy. So what I've kind of used GPT-3 to do as a improv artist, not necessarily a stand-up comedian, is to help me expand the craziness kind of factor of my stories, right? So you like might already have like a story that you would try at a club, before, as you're like kind of like taking down your jokes for like your bigger gigs, and then you would basically kind of have GPT-3 co-write every other joke with you, not like as a co-writer in terms of it knows the details, but like can kind of spark your memory, and to kind of like make your story a little bit more pronounced and a little bit more out there. And then you can A/B test that with your audiences. So that's something that I've looked into. I still haven't found a good solution yet in terms of like having it just write funny jokes, because it just doesn't really get jokes, at least yet, in terms of like the nuance of it. But yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Do you think you
Yeah.
can plug in like classic comedic scenes and some elements of those scenes to maybe get options for future creative scenes? And maybe it doesn't write the joke, but it helps to create the scenery or the position or the situation that you're in, and then you as the comedian bring the funny.
So GPT-3 is as simple as you just need to get the text together. Like you just need the script. And if you can paste that script in, you could just push a button and it will try to answer what's next and fill it out for you. So anything's possible, whether that's jokes or whatever. One dimension that I'd be really interested in, and maybe we could collaborate. I'd love to see GPT-3 Dave Chappelle, because certainly there's a shortage of Dave Chappelle.
I tried.
Right?
I tried to have a conversation between Dave Chappelle, Eddie Murphy, and Kevin Hart, and I was like, Eddie Murphy and Dave Chappelle talk shit about Kevin Hart, and it talked shit, but I couldn't tell if I heard Dave Chappelle's voice in the conversation, but it was definitely talking shit about the Kevin Hart character.
But it can go in any direction, right? Like that's one case. But maybe you gave a specific topic and just had everybody else chime in, whether it's Rock or Chappelle, on how they feel, right? By the way, that's also one fun use case for comedians, I guess, is so GPT-3, you can get it to almost pretend to be Dave Chappelle. And one thing that I could do if I'm on the come up is essentially have it take the role of Dave Chappelle and ask it about current topics, and you'd almost hopefully have Dave Chappelle's take on that topic, right? And you can run with it and maybe add your own spice and flair to it to make a you, right? But yeah. I personally love hearing what Dave Chappelle has to say about everything, Like I'm South Asian. I'd love to hear what he has to say about South Asians, right? I don't know why, but he doesn't talk about it. But you know what? Maybe GPT-3 could figure it out, right? Because he's certainly a very, very awesome guy. So, real opportunity. I encourage you guys to explore.
Absolutely, appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, can I quickly jump in? So
sure. And if anybody needs to go, sorry, if anybody needs to go, it's about 5:30. I'm happy to stick around. If you got to go, it's cool. I'm happy to stick around right to the end.
I gotta run, but thanks everybody for this. It's really been great. Love this conversation a lot. I appreciate
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it, man.
Likewise, man.
Thanks, Brian.
Later.
Awesome.
Thank you, Bram.
So what I wanted to jump in with was basically, I'm also a stand-up comedian, and I take a bit of a metrics-based approach to my comedy, and actually two books that I kind of take a lot of, I kind of as my foundations. One of them is like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and the other one is Social Physics by a guy called Sandy Pentland. What I ended up doing basically is I ended up doing a couple of YouTube videos, watching a couple of specials, and kind of collecting some data points on the performance of the artist, right? Like, let's say Dave Chappelle or like Chris Rock or whatever. So what I ended up doing is I counted like laughs per minute, then the amount of, let's say, vulgarities used, the amount of basically act outs that were used in that particular comedian's show, the amount of punchlines that originate from, let's say, a character, the amount of characters created. So I'm thinking, is there any possible way to kind of feed that data into GPT-3 to give it more insight on how to actually kind of create those type of jokes?
So I could chime in on that. Like, it mainly, honestly, in my experience, GPT-3 just loves text data. It has some notion of numbers and can do basic algebra, and it might understand the percentages. But in my opinion, it treats a percentage as a percentage, not the actual representation of what that percentage or value means. And so that sounds like a really complicated sentence, but I hope that made sense. Like, it knows what a number is, but I don't think it actually appreciates what that number represents. And so I would just recommend text-based data.
If you were able, let's say, if you were to feed it the, let's say, the text data of like a Dave Chappelle show, and then the text data of, let's say, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, would it be able to kind of draw any form of conclusions, or what would be the element? What would be how would it combine those two different sets of?
I think, Terry, I can jump in on this one. I think I don't know about introducing the book as an element, but I think one thing I've just been thinking about in another area is they have a thing which is fine tuning, which is where you can like apply to fine tune the model to a sort of an additional data set. So maybe not one Dave Chappelle show, but if you had, for instance, like, I don't know, several megabytes of text of like transcripts of stand-up comedy that you liked, and fed that through it, I'd be really curious to see what the result there might be, because it might get more on point if you gave it more specific examples than maybe it's trained on.
I think people also try and go too big at first. I think start with a couple lines, a paragraph first, and see what you get before, because everyone wants to fine tune it. Everyone wants to give it like massive sets of data where it doesn't really need it. You just need to be more concise.
But I was curious in the example you were giving earlier. Did you give it? Did you tee up some examples of those comedians and their voices before you? Oh, so you just went right like zero shot. Cool.
Yeah, I went straight zero shot.
Man, one of my favorite. This is an aside. I love talking to Elon Musk GPT-3. I love it. How else would I possibly have a conversation with Elon Musk? You know what I'm saying? And so I encourage everyone here, once you get access to GPT-3, have a conversation with your heroes. You know, this might be just a life experience for you that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And you might actually be able to not only draw inspiration, but even material. You know, I still got to talk to GPT-3 Elon Musk about other things that I'm thinking about now and just get the feedback from the model.
Yeah, first person's a lot of fun. I set up a talk recently with Rosa Parks, and asked her about the civil rights era, but also she had family familiarity as well. Well, the GPT-3 version.
Wow.
It wasn't just pulling facts from a textbook.
And so, by the way, just Abron is being way too humble right now. Abron is the person, especially for GPT-3 and altruistic perspectives. He's sort of leading the Slack group channel. And also he's even offered to help people if you have ideas and you just want feedback. How can I do good with GPT-3? He is the person to go to. And so I really recommend you connect with him on Twitter and everywhere else and follow along with his stuff too. Abron, just as an aside, tell us about you were showing kids how to use GPT-3. How'd that go?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. The Greater Baltimore Urban League, they do a Saturday program with kids in general to try and get them, engaged and, do some enrichment around STEM. And one of the members of the Urban League runs a podcast, and she's great on here on Clubhouse. She goes by AI Decodes, Amber. So I did AI Decodes podcast, and then she invited me out to speak with the kids, and they had some really interesting questions. They got it automatically. I shared a highlight on our Instagram of a kid asking, like, how do I make money? And I was like, man, y'all cut straight to the point, huh? But it was funny. It was interesting. So they speak to Clara, who is the AI persona that we created that's powered by GPT-3. And Clara was like, ask your parents to give you some money to invest in stocks. And they were like, well, what stocks? And she was like, well, I can give you advice, but it's ultimately up to you. So she kind of dodged the stock question, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, I mean, Janelle, you're up here. You already know, like, if you want to use the system, if you have an idea and a use case, you can always reach out to us, and we can, set up like a guided session where we help people So just what Bax was saying, like people book office hours with myself and Bram, who was up here earlier, as community ambassadors to help them flesh out their ideas and concepts. And if it's a concept that's aligned with our mission around social impact, then I'll give you some access through some one-on-one time with us, and then help you flesh out that idea. And that's part of it too. The OpenAI really needs to be careful with just giving anybody access that doesn't really know what to do with it. I think part of it is like if you have an idea that you want to flesh out, we try and give folks that opportunity. We just want it to be something that's for good.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were just talking about it earlier. And Lupe is one of the dopest rappers ever. So just to even have that's why it was so interesting listening to Bax talk about the tastemaker, the idea of really having a good grasp on this in the first place. So yeah, I'll talk to him about it more and kind of see what it is he want to do. I don't speak for him or nothing.
Yeah, no, it's
For
a
sure.
tremendous opportunity. It benefits everybody at every level. One of the more controversial takes I have is I do think GPT-3 does a lot just by existence for equality. Whether that's skill gap, access, whatever dimension you can think of that might disadvantage someone, boy, does it really level the playing field. And in which case, if you do have a level playing field, the exciting thing is it's just about taste. If refugees have better taste, I believe they will surpass people with every known advantage with the access to the same thing.
And the fun part of us getting it in front of people who are non-technical is that technical people think a certain type of way. When you get it in front of people who are non-technical, they completely think out the box with how to use it. And you get more genuine ideas that way.
Okay, so back to the question about data. my short answer is give it a spin. Let us know how it goes. I think there's ways you could do it. I think there's ways, and you can always poll the community and ask, like, here's what I'm trying to do. What do you guys think? Kind of thing, right? But definitely try it. There will be some subset that GPT-3 can do, and I think you'll just get distracted talking to Elon Musk. So definitely check it out.
Guys,
Okay.
we'll have to wrap up. Thank you so much for the meeting. It was super interesting to participate, and thank you, Bax, for setting it up once again. Take care.
Thank you, Sandra. Appreciate you joining. And make sure everybody check out Sandra on YouTube. She's got some tremendous stuff. And she also does a lot of really good explanations, especially for people who are non-technical. So amazing person to follow on YouTube. I highly encourage you to.
Thank you so much. Take care.